carefully, because this story could be someone you know. The house had learned her routine long before she realized how much comfort she took in it. Every evening, just after sunset, the light in the hallway softened into a warm amber glow. The air grew quieter. The noise of the outside world faded into distant traffic and passing lives that no longer brushed against hers. This was her hour, the time she believed belonged only to peace. She stood at the kitchen counter, fingers resting lightly against the cool surface, listening to the gentle hum of the refrigerator. The kettle hadn't begun to whistle yet, but she could already imagine the steam rising, the familiar scent of tea filling the room. For years, this moment had meant safety. Her marriage had never been loud. It wasn't filled with dramatic arguments or slammed doors. It was built on predictability, on shared mornings and silent evenings, on the comfort of knowing what came next. Or at least, that's what she believed. She glanced toward the living room, where her husband sat on the couch, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on the soft glow of his phone screen. His face was calm, almost blank. The television played quietly, some forgettable show neither of them was truly watching. He hadn't noticed her watching him. There was nothing unusual about that either. He often retreated into his phone after dinner, scrolling endlessly, thumb moving with practiced ease. She had stopped asking what he was reading long ago. It felt unnecessary. Distrust had never been part of their language, or so she thought. She poured hot water into her cup and carried it carefully to the dining table, choosing the chair closest to the window. Outside, the sky was deepening into twilight, painted in muted blues and grays. The reflection in the glass showed the faint outline of her face, calm, composed, unaware. She sipped slowly, letting the warmth settle in her chest. And yet, something felt off. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was more like a subtle pressure, the kind you feel before a storm when the air grows heavy, but the sky remains clear, a quiet discomfort she couldn't name. She watched him again. His thumb paused mid-scroll, just for a moment. Then his phone tilted slightly away, as if instinctively shielding the screen. It was a small gesture, so small she almost dismissed it. Almost. Her mind, trained by years of trust, rushed to explain it away. Maybe he was reading something private. Maybe he was tired. Maybe she was imagining things. She hated that her thoughts lingered there. They hadn't always been this distant. There was a time when evenings meant conversation, shared stories about the day, laughter over trivial things, silence that felt companionable rather than empty. Somewhere along the way, that warmth had cooled, replaced by something quieter and harder to reach. Still, she had never doubted his loyalty. Not until recently, Not until the subtle changes began stacking up like unanswered questions. Late nights, the phone always face down. A password changed without explanation. Conversations that ended too quickly when she entered the room. A sudden interest in social media platforms he had once dismissed as pointless. None of it screamed betrayal. But together they whispered. She rose from her chair and carried her empty cup to the sink, moving closer to him under the excuse of routine. Her heart skipped. He locked the screen immediately. Too quickly. He looked up at her then, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Everything okay?" he asked casually. She nodded. "Just tired." The lie came easily. She was good at that. Years of smoothing over discomfort had trained her well. She returned to the kitchen, her pulse suddenly loud in her ears. Her thoughts raced, colliding with one another, each one more unsettling than the last. It meant nothing, she told herself. It could be anyone, a coworker, an ad, a friend's post. But deep down, something had shifted. That moment, brief, almost invisible, had planted a seed she couldn't ignore. Later that night, after the lights were turned off and the house settled into silence, she lay awake beside him. His breathing was steady, untroubled. One arm rested loosely across his side, familiar and distant all at once. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the image in her mind. The face on the screen, the speed with which he'd hidden it, the ease of his smile afterward. Her chest tightened. She didn't reach for his phone. Not yet. She wasn't ready for the truth, whatever it might be. There was still comfort in uncertainty, still safety in not knowing. But the quiet cracks had formed. And once they appear, they never truly disappear. As the night deepened, she realized something she had never admitted before, not even to herself. Trust doesn't shatter all at once. It erodes, slowly, silently. And sometimes by the time you notice the damage, the foundation is already weakened beyond repair. There is a particular kind of silence that does not feel empty. It feels crowded. It was the silence that lived in the house after Daniel came home from work, placed his phone face down on the table, and smiled as if nothing in the world had shifted. Mara noticed it first in small ways. The way he laughed a second too late. The way his eyes stayed fixed on the screen, even when she spoke. The way his phone never left his hand, not during dinner, not during movies, not even when they lay side by side in bed. She told herself it was stress. Everyone lived on their phones now. That was what people said. But intuition does not shout. It whispers. And once you hear it, it does not stop. At night, when the house was quiet, Daniel's screen would glow softly in the dark. Mara would pretend to sleep, her breathing slow and even, while her thoughts raced. Who are you talking to at midnight? Why do you smile like that? Why does your thumb move so carefully? as if every word matters. Sometimes he would turn slightly away from her, angling his body toward the edge of the bed, as if protecting something fragile, as if protecting someone. Mara did not confront him, not yet. She had learned long ago that truth reveals itself faster when it believes it is safe. Instead, she observed. She noticed how his phone was suddenly always on silent, how passwords changed, how notifications disappeared the moment they appeared. And then there were the emails. It started with one message that flashed briefly across the screen when Daniel left his phone on the kitchen counter. A name she didn't recognize, a heart emoji. Daniel snatched the phone up quickly, but not quickly enough. Mara felt something cold slide down her spine. She told herself not to assume. People send hearts casually. Now, it could be a joke, a coworker, a misunderstanding. But her body did not believe the lie. Over the next weeks, the pattern grew clearer. Different names, different apps, different tones of affection. Late-night laughter, bathroom doors locked longer than usual, showers that ran while messages were sent. Mara began waking earlier than Daniel, sitting at the edge of the bed with a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands, staring at nothing while everything rearranged itself inside her. She didn't cry. That surprised her. Instead, she felt suspended, as if she were floating just above her own life, watching it from a distance. One morning, while Daniel slept, his phone buzzed again. Once, twice, 3 times. Mara reached for it before she could stop herself. Her hands trembled, but her mind was strangely calm. The screen lit up, and there it was. Not one conversation, not 2, 6. 6 separate threads, 6 different women, 6 versions of her husband she had never met. Some messages were flirtatious, some explicit, some emotional, in a way that cut deeper than anything physical. You make me feel seen. I wish I had met you first. I can't wait until tonight. Her chest tightened, not from shock, but from recognition. So this was why he felt distant. So this was where his warmth had gone. Mara placed the phone back exactly where it had been. She sat down slowly, as if the floor might tilt beneath her. This was not a mistake. This was a system. And systems do not break on their own. When Daniel woke up, she greeted him the same way she always did. "Good morning," she said softly. He smiled, unaware that the ground beneath him had already started to crack. That night, lying awake, beside him, Mara finally allowed one tear to fall. Not for the women, not even for the betrayal, but for the version of herself who had trusted without armor. By morning, that version was gone, and something quieter, stronger, took her place. She did not confront him right away. That was the first thing she learned about herself. in moments like this. She needed silence before she needed answers. For days after that night, she moved through the house like someone walking through fog. She cooked. She cleaned. She smiled when he spoke. She listened when he talked about work, about traffic, about nothing that mattered. And all the while, something inside her stayed awake, watching. It started with small inconsistencies. He began carrying his phone everywhere. To the bathroom, to the garage, even to bed, resting it face down on the nightstand like a secret that refused to sleep. Notifications buzzed late at night, always silenced quickly. He laughed softly at messages he never shared. She told herself she was imagining things. She told herself marriage had seasons, and this was just one of them. But the human heart is not foolish forever. One afternoon, while folding laundry, she noticed a name appear on his phone as it lit up on the dresser. Not a name she recognized, not a number either, just a username. Casual, playful, intimate in a way that made her stomach tighten. She did not open the message. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and waited for the sound of her own breathing to steady. That night, after he fell asleep, she opened her laptop. She wasn't searching for proof. She was searching for peace, hoping she wouldn't find anything that would change the way she saw her life. But what she found changed everything. Accounts she had never known existed. Conversations that stretched back months. Compliments repeated to different women as if copied and pasted. Late-night confessions that sounded like intimacy but carried no responsibility. 6 women, different faces, different names, the same words. Her hands trembled, not from rage, but from realization. This was not a mistake. This was a pattern. She closed the laptop slowly, as though making a sound might shatter the fragile calm holding her together. In the quiet of the house, she felt something unfamiliar settle into her chest. Not heartbreak alone, but clarity. She finally understood why the distance had grown so quietly, why affection had become routine, why she had felt lonely even when she was not alone. He had been elsewhere, emotionally, digitally, deliberately. She did not cry that night. She sat in the dark and listened to the rhythm of a life she had trusted, now revealed as something entirely different. And for the first time since her marriage began, she asked herself a question she had never dared to ask before. If this is the truth, who do I become next? She did not yet know the answer, but she knew this: she would never unknow what she had seen. And from that moment on, nothing between them was invisible anymore. She did not confront him right away. That night, she lay beside him, in the dark, listening to his breathing. It was slow, even, unbothered. The kind of sleep that comes easily to someone who believes they are unseen. Her phone rested face down on the nightstand, burning with everything it now knew. Earlier that evening, after he had showered and left his laptop unattended, curiosity had pulled her forward. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a quiet tide. She hadn't been searching for proof. She had been searching for reassurance. What she found instead was a second life. 6 conversations. 6 women. Different names, different cities, different tones. Some playful, some intimate, some painfully detailed. Messages that stretched back months. Photos sent late at night. Voice notes whispered when she had been asleep in the next room. This was not one mistake. This was a pattern. She read slowly, methodically, as though she were studying evidence rather than heartbreak. One woman believed he was separated. Another thought he was single. One had been told she was the only one who understood him. The words repeated themselves in different forms, like echoes of the same lie. I've never felt this connection before. My marriage is complicated. You make me feel alive. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. What stunned her most was not the betrayal itself, but the effort, the time, the emotional energy. While she had been building a life, he had been curating an illusion. She closed the laptop without leaving a trace. Back in bed, staring at the ceiling, she realized something quietly devastating. The man beside her did not just cheat on her. He rehearsed betrayal daily. And yet, beneath the shock, something unexpected began to form. Clarity. She saw now why he had been distant, why affection had felt rationed, why arguments had begun over nothing at all. He had been living 6 different versions of himself, and none of them had room for truth. In the morning, she watched him drink his coffee, scroll his phone, smile absent-mindedly. He kissed her cheek on his way out, just as he always did. For the first time, the gesture meant nothing. She did not cry after he left. Instead, she opened a notebook and began to write. Dates, names, times, screenshots she had already secured, patterns she could already see. She was no longer guessing. She was documenting. And somewhere in that quiet act, the balance shifted. She was no longer the woman waiting to be hurt. She was the woman preparing to reclaim herself. By the 5th week, the truth no longer arrived in shocks. It arrived in patterns. Patterns are worse than surprises. Surprises hurt once. Patterns tell you it has been happening for a long time, and that you were never meant to know. I stopped opening messages hoping to be wrong. I opened them to understand how deep the damage went. What I found wasn't just betrayal. It was routine, different usernames, different platforms, different women, yet the same words. He told one woman she made him feel seen, another that he had never connected like this before, a third that his marriage was just paperwork now, and a fourth, maybe a fifth, that he was planning a future. The future he promised them was built on my present. What stunned me most wasn't the number of affairs. It was the effort. He remembered birthdays. He scheduled calls. He sent voice notes late at night when he thought I was asleep beside him. He learned their fears, their pasts, their dreams. He had become fluent in emotional intimacy, Just not with me. I started writing things down, not because I planned revenge, but because my mind needed structure. Dates, times, names, platforms. The human brain reaches for order when reality becomes unbearable. One night, I noticed something that made my chest go cold. He wasn't hiding anymore. His phone lay face up on the table. Notifications buzzed unchecked. He no longer jumped to grab it. It was as if secrecy had exhausted him, or perhaps he believed I would never dare look. That realization hurt in a different way. He didn't fear losing me. He feared inconvenience. I watched him that evening, the way one watches a stranger in a familiar room. He laughed at something on his screen, thumb moving fast, practiced. I wondered how many versions of himself existed now, and which one had ever been real. Later, when he slept, I listened to his breathing and felt something inside me shift. Grief turned into clarity. I wasn't competing with other women. I was competing with his appetite for validation. And that is not a contest anyone can win. The next day, I did something quiet, but decisive. I stopped asking questions. No more, "Who are you texting?" No more, "Are you okay?" No more invitations for honesty. Instead, I observed. I noticed how he grew irritated when real life interrupted his online world. How he rushed conversations with me, but lingered on replies to strangers. How his patience belonged elsewhere. This wasn't an accident. It was a system. And systems leave trails. I began to understand something essential. This story was no longer about what he did. It was about what I would do with the knowledge. That night, I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. I expected to see someone broken. Instead, I saw someone awake. Pain had stripped away denial. Awareness had replaced hope. And for the first time since the truth surfaced, I didn't feel powerless. I felt prepared. Because when betrayal becomes repetitive, it also becomes predictable. And predictability is leverage. I didn't know yet how the story would end, only that I would not disappear quietly inside it. There is a moment just before the truth becomes unavoidable, when silence feels heavier than sound. Shoulders relaxed but unmoving, hands folded loosely in front of her laptop. The screen glowed faintly, casting a pale light across her face, highlighting the tiredness she had stopped trying to hide from herself. She wasn't crying. That surprised her. A few weeks ago, she might have shattered at what she now knew. But tonight, with proof resting quietly in front of her, she felt something else entirely. Stillness. It had started earlier that evening, with something so small she almost ignored it. A notification. Not on her phone, on his. He had left it charging on the counter while he showered, screen lighting up briefly with a name she didn't recognize. No message preview. Just a name. Casual. Ordinary. And yet something in her had shifted the moment she saw it. She hadn't touched the phone. That mattered to her. She had made a promise to herself long ago. She would never become someone who searched through another person's life like a thief in the night. If she was going to learn the truth, it would be because it came to her, not because she chased it down. Still, the moment stayed with her. Later, after he went to bed, she opened her laptop instead. She didn't know what she expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe reassurance. Maybe confirmation that the tight feeling in her chest had been lying to her all along. What she found instead was quiet, methodical, and devastating. It wasn't one thing. That was the hardest part. It was the pattern. Accounts that didn't quite match. Email addresses she had never seen before. Social media profiles that felt half-finished, like rooms designed only for passing through. Conversations saved in places most people never thought to look. Archived folders, forgotten platforms, login histories that told stories without words. 6. Not one mistake. Not a moment of weakness. 6 different online lives, each one carefully separated, each one offering a version of him that felt strangely rehearsed. Attentive, wounded, misunderstood, endlessly available. She scrolled slowly, deliberately, reading without rushing, letting the truth arrive at its own pace. He told them he felt lonely. He told them he wasn't understood. He told them he was trapped in a life that no longer fit. He told them he had never felt this way before. The words repeated themselves across different conversations, like lines memorized for an audition. He never stopped performing. And with each repetition, something inside her settled into place. It wasn't rage. It wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. She closed the laptop gently, as if afraid of waking someone, and leaned back in her chair. The wood creaked softly beneath her weight. 6 affairs. And yet, sitting there in the quiet, she realized something unexpected. None of it felt personal anymore. That realization frightened her more than anger ever could have. She thought back over the years, not the fights, not the disappointments, but the ordinary moments. Mornings when she made coffee while he checked his phone. Evenings when he nodded at her words without really hearing them. The way he smiled quickly, efficiently, like someone completing a task. How long, she wondered, had he been dividing himself into pieces and offering each one away? And more importantly, when had she stopped expecting him to be whole? The rain outside grew heavier, the sound filling the spaces between her thoughts. She stood and walked to the window, resting her forehead briefly against the cool glass. She didn't feel foolish. That surprised her too. For years, she had believed that being betrayed meant being naive, meant missing obvious signs, meant failing to see what was right in front of you. But now, with the truth laid bare, she understood something different. Trust was not blindness. It was a choice. And choices had consequences. Behind her, the hallway creaked as he shifted in his sleep. The sound moved through the house like a ghost of familiarity. Once, that sound had meant comfort. Now, it simply existed. She returned to the table and opened the laptop again. this time not to search, but to save. Screenshots, dates, account names, patterns. Not with anger, with care. She wasn't collecting ammunition. She was gathering certainty. As the minutes passed, she felt herself slipping into a strange calm, one that bordered on detachment. The emotional storm everyone talked about, the screaming, the confrontation, the dramatic collapse, never came. Instead, there was this, a quiet reckoning. She realized, somewhere between saving files and closing tabs, that she wasn't preparing to confront him tonight, or tomorrow, or even soon. She was preparing to choose herself. That thought lingered, heavy and unfamiliar. For so long, her energy had been spent trying to understand him, his moods, his silences, his distance. She had learned to phrase her needs gently, to time her questions carefully, to accept half answers without pushing for more. Now, sitting alone in the dim light, she saw how much space that had taken, and how little had been left for her. She closed the laptop for the final time and placed her hands flat on the table, grounding herself in the solidness of the moment. The wood was cool beneath her palms, real and present. She wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She was awake. In the bedroom, he turned again, murmuring something unintelligible. She listened without reacting, surprised by how distant he already felt. Like a character from a story she had finished reading. She wondered briefly if he sensed the shift, if something in the air had changed enough to reach him in his sleep. Probably not. People who lived divided lives rarely noticed when the truth arrived quietly. She stood, turned off the kitchen light, and let the room fall into darkness. As she walked down the hallway, she caught her reflection in the mirror, eyes steady, posture straight, expression unreadable. For the first time in a long while, she didn't ask herself what he would say when she confronted him. She asked herself something else instead. What would her life look like if she stopped waiting for someone else to be honest? The question followed her into the bedroom, settling beside her like a promise. And as she lay down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain and the rhythm of his breathing, she understood that this chapter of her life was ending, not with noise, not with chaos, but with quiet proof. The kind that changes everything. By the 7th month after the truth began to unravel, silence had become heavier than any argument they had ever shared. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence that once lived between them, the kind that came from shared comfort or quiet understanding. This silence was sharp. It pressed against her chest in the early mornings and followed her into every room at night. It lingered in the spaces where trust once lived. She noticed it first in the smallest moments. The way the house no longer felt warm when she returned home. The way her phone no longer brought comfort, only dread. The way even her own reflection seemed to question her choices. He was still there, physically present, moving through the house like a shadow, but emotionally, he felt farther away than strangers passing on the street. And for the first time, she stopped trying to reach him. She stopped asking questions that only led to half-truths. She stopped searching his face for honesty. She stopped hoping that love alone could fix what betrayal had shattered. Instead, she began listening to her own thoughts, listening to her exhaustion, listening to the quiet voice inside her that had been whispering for months, telling her that surviving wasn't the same as living. At night, she lay, awake, replaying the past, not the betrayals themselves, but the moments before them. The laughter that felt real, the promises that sounded sincere, the memories that now carried a weight she never expected them to hold. She realized something, painful but freeing. She had been loyal, not just to him, but to an idea of him that no longer existed. And that realization changed everything. The emotional weight began shifting slowly, quietly, away from anger and toward clarity. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Understanding that betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's hidden behind smiles. Sometimes it wears familiarity. Sometimes it grows quietly, while love is still being given freely. She started reclaiming pieces of herself she hadn't even realized she had lost. Her mornings became intentional. Her thoughts became guarded. Her heart, once open without limits, now learned boundaries. She stopped explaining her pain to people who minimized it. She stopped justifying staying to those who didn't understand. She stopped feeling guilty for needing space. And he noticed. He noticed the change before she ever spoke it aloud. Her eyes no longer searched for reassurance. Her voice no longer trembled when his name was mentioned. Her presence felt steadier, firmer, like someone who had quietly made a decision but wasn't ready to reveal it yet. That frightened him more than anger ever could. For the first time, he tried to speak without defending himself. For the first time, he tried to listen instead of explaining. For the first time, he felt what it meant to lose control. Not over her actions, but over her emotional availability. But regret, when it arrives late, rarely brings repair. It brings realization. And realization brings fear. She didn't confront him. She didn't accuse him. She didn't threaten to leave. She simply became unavailable to the chaos he created. And that was the loudest response of all. In the quiet moments, the ones where she used to cry, she now reflected. She began imagining a future where her peace wasn't dependent on someone else's honesty, where love didn't require constant survival, where trust didn't feel like a gamble. She didn't know yet whether she would stay or leave, but she knew one thing with certainty. She would never again beg someone to choose her. The silence between them grew heavier, but this time it wasn't crushing her. It was freeing her. And somewhere deep inside, a chapter was closing, even if neither of them was ready to admit it yet. By the time the sun began to rise, she had already been awake for hours. The house was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar now. Not peaceful, just empty. The kind of silence that follows a truth once it has been exposed, when nothing feels the same anymore. She sat at the dining table with her laptop open, her coffee untouched, staring at a screen filled with messages she wished she had never seen. 6 affairs, 6 different women, different names, different cities, different excuses, and yet the same words. She scrolled slowly, reading conversations that stretched back years. Compliments copied and pasted. Promises that sounded intimate until she saw them repeated again and again. Sent to different women within the same week. You make me feel alive. I've never told anyone this before. My marriage is complicated. She felt something shift inside her. Not pain this time, but clarity. This wasn't love gone wrong. This was manipulation refined through practice. What hurt the most wasn't the flirting or even the explicit messages. It was the emotional intimacy he had stolen from their marriage and handed out freely to strangers. The late-night conversations, he claimed, were work stress. The long showers, where he said he needed space. The weekends, he insisted on clearing his head. All lies. She realized now how carefully he had built his double life. Separate emails, hidden apps, deleted histories. Not reckless, strategic. She paused on one message thread longer than the others. This woman had known about her. I feel guilty, the woman wrote. I know you're married. And he replied, don't worry. She doesn't really see me anymore. That line landed harder than anything else, because she had seen him. Every day. She had simply trusted him. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the laptop, not from shock. That stage had passed, but from the weight of understanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern. And patterns didn't stop unless they were confronted. Later that afternoon, she went for a walk. The air outside felt sharper, colder, as if the world had adjusted to match her new reality. She watched people pass by, couples laughing, phones in hands, trust assumed without question. She wondered how many lives looked whole from the outside while quietly unraveling underneath. When she returned home, she didn't cry. Instead, she opened a notebook, and she began to write. Dates, times, screenshots, account names, not for revenge, for truth. For the first time since discovering everything, she felt something that resembled control, not over him, but over herself. The digital ghosts of his choices no longer haunted her blindly. She was naming them, and once named, they could no longer hide. By the time the sun rose that morning, she had already lived through several lifetimes. The house was quiet in the way it becomes after something irreversible has happened. Not peaceful, just hollow. The kind of silence that presses against the ears and forces thoughts to speak louder than they should. She sat at the kitchen table, her phone resting face down beside her coffee mug. The screen no longer glowed with hidden messages or unfamiliar names. She had read everything, every conversation, every lie softened with emojis, every promise he had typed to women who were never supposed to exist in her life. 6 affairs, not one mistake, not a moment of weakness. 6 separate choices made over months, sometimes overlapping, sometimes casually abandoned when boredom set in. Different women, same words, same lies. She didn't cry anymore. That part had passed sometime during the night, when the shock finally gave way to clarity. What hurt the most wasn't the explicit messages or the late-night confessions he shared with strangers. It was how carefully he had protected those versions of himself, while growing distant, impatient, and cold with her. She replayed the past year in her mind with painful accuracy. The nights he stayed up late, working. The sudden password changes. The way he flinched when she picked up his phone. The arguments that ended with her apologizing for asking too many questions. She had blamed herself for all of it. She stood slowly and walked through the house, touching familiar objects like she was saying goodbye without admitting it yet. The couch where they once laughed until midnight. The hallway mirror where she used to adjust his tie before important meetings. The bedroom that no longer felt like a place of rest. When he finally came home that afternoon, she was ready. He sensed it immediately. There was no shouting, no trembling voice, no desperate questions, just her calm presence at the dining table, the phone placed carefully between them, like evidence already submitted. "Sit down," she said. He did. She didn't ask if he wanted to explain. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask how long. She slid the phone toward him. "I know," she said. All of it. The color drained from his face in slow realization. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Words rushed to the surface, but found nowhere to land. He tried anyway. "It didn't mean anything," he said quickly. "It was online. Just messages. I never planned." She raised a hand gently. "Please don't insult me by minimizing it," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not unkind. "You didn't accidentally betray me 6 times. That was when something in him broke, not in regret yet, but in fear. He started explaining. Overlapping stories, excuses wrapped in stress, loneliness, curiosity, validation, each reason contradicting the last. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she said the sentence that changed everything. "I'm not angry because you cheated," she said softly. "I'm angry because you watched me doubt my worth while you hid behind lies." That was the moment he understood what he had lost. Not just her trust, but her emotional presence. The woman who once believed in him without reservation was already stepping away, quietly, decisively. She stood up, gathering the strength she had been building since the night before. "I need space," she said, "not to punish you, to hear myself think again." He reached for her hand, panic flashing across his face. "Please," he whispered. "Don't do this. I'll fix it. I swear." She gently pulled her hand away. "You should have fixed it when I was still begging to be seen," she replied. And with that, she walked past him, not as someone running away, but as someone finally walking forward. For the first time since the truth surfaced, she felt something unfamiliar but powerful rising inside her. Not revenge, not hatred, clarity. There is a strange kind of silence that follows betrayal. Not the loud, dramatic kind filled with shouting or accusations, but the quiet kind that settles in after the truth has already done its damage. For her, this silence arrived in pieces. It arrived in the way the house sounded emptier, even when someone else was in the room. It arrived in the way mornings felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted being breathed in. It arrived in the pauses between thoughts, those moments when she realized she no longer expected honesty from the person she once trusted most. She had stopped asking questions, not because she had answers, but because she had learned that answers no longer brought relief. The truth about his online affairs had unfolded slowly, like a wound that refused to close. 6 names, 6 conversations, 6 versions of him that had existed parallel to her life, invisible, yet powerful enough to reshape everything she thought she knew. And now, after the confrontation, after the explanations that sounded rehearsed rather than sincere, there was only this quiet. He tried to act normal. He spoke in careful tones. He asked ordinary questions. He pretended that time alone could fix what deception had broken. But she noticed the changes, the way he avoided her eyes, not out of guilt, but out of discomfort, the way apologies came wrapped in excuses, the way regret appeared only when consequences felt real. She listened, but she no longer absorbed his words. Instead, her mind began to turn inward. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about saving the relationship. She wasn't planning how to repair trust or rebuild what had collapsed. She was thinking about herself. She thought about the woman she had been before she learned how deeply betrayal could cut. The woman who believed love meant safety. The woman who trusted without keeping emotional armor close by. And she wondered quietly, honestly, if that woman was gone forever. Late one night, she sat alone with her phone in her hand, not scrolling, not searching, just holding it. The same device that had carried his secrets, the same screen that had once been harmless, now heavy with meaning. She realized something then. The affairs had not only changed how she saw him, they had changed how she saw the world, how fragile commitment really was, how easily people learned to live double lives. But they had also changed something else. They had stripped away her illusions, and beneath them, there was clarity. She no longer wanted explanations. She no longer wanted promises. What she wanted was peace. And peace, she knew now, would not come from pretending everything could go back to how it was. House slept. She made a quiet decision. Not a dramatic one. Not a final one. But an honest one. As dawn crept slowly toward the windows, she understood something that changed the direction of everything that would follow. The end of trust is not always loud. Sometimes it sounds like calm. And calm, she was learning, could be the beginning of strength. She didn't raise her voice. That surprised everyone the most. In the courtroom, surrounded by strangers, legal language, and months of hidden truths, she stood calm, steady in a way she had never been during the marriage. The evidence had already spoken. The messages, the financial trails, the 6 online affairs, each one denying responsibility, each one feeding the same hunger for validation. He sat across from her, smaller somehow, not defeated by the law, but by the realization that she no longer needed him to explain anything. When the judge spoke, it felt distant, almost irrelevant, because the real verdict had already been reached inside her. Later, outside the courthouse, he tried to speak. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. She nodded, not in agreement, but in closure. "I know," she replied softly. That's the problem. There was no dramatic goodbye, no final argument, no last look back. She walked away, not angry, not victorious in the way movies portray, but free. And that freedom was louder than any revenge. Some people wait their whole lives for an apology. Others realize they don't need one. Healing doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like silence, like choosing peace, like walking forward without dragging the past behind you. Is this story touched you? You're not alone. There is life after betrayal, and sometimes it's stronger than the life you lost and